I would like to welcome everyone today to our next Cooking with Kole class. My name is Allison Carmola, and I am a librarian at the Beatley Central Library. And if you'd like to take it away, Kole.
Absolutely, yeah. Happy Saturday, guys, and Happy New Year. If it feels like it's been a little while since my previous class, it's because it has been. I think it's been about 3 weeks. On January 2nd, I believe that we made a ramen and some spicy edamame. And today we have more of a breakfast-themed class. We're making a savory version of French toast, as well as some quinoa cakes is what I call them. They're sort of my personal spin on like a some healthy potatoes, or an alternative to potatoes. But there's lots going on in the kitchen today. It's not terribly too complicated, and if you're in a pinch for time, you can get this out of the kitchen really fast. So what I have going on behind me is I have 2 skillets that are kind of at a medium heat. Both of them have a tablespoon of butter as well as a tablespoon of olive oil. And then some simple housekeeping things. I'm pretty sure you guys can see this camera here, so what I'm prepping with. And before I forget, I'm gonna plug it in just in case my battery dies. 1 second. There we go, okay. And my cutting board is secure to my counter. There is a silicone heat pad on that, and if you don't have that, that's okay. If you just use a moist paper towel, that suction helps to make sure that your cutting board isn't going to move as you're prepping your ingredients. And also, whenever you're holding a knife, you always just want to make sure that your index finger is hugging the outside of the blade. And the reason is because you're going to have a really you're going to have a better job at making sure that your cuts are nice and precise. So we're going to get moving right along. One thing that takes a little bit of time is we're going to saute 1 small yellow onion. So I've already prepped this in just a very simple mince. And then also I'm going to put in the stove or the skillet behind me about 3 cloves of minced garlic. And so I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Turn the heat just a little bit, because ideally the sound that I'm looking for is there would be a sizzle going on right about now. But I was a little bit pinched for time this morning. So whenever you're doing this, you always want to make sure that everything is about evenly coated in oil so that you get a nice caramelization and crust to everything. So really what we're looking for here is just, it'll be done cooking right around when the onions become transparent. And so as that is heating up and getting going, we're going to prep some more of the ingredients for our quinoa cakes. And I have here, it looks like 4 or 5 green onions. And so all I'm going to do is give these a nice thin chop. There's lots of onion happening today, and that's because there's lots of savoriness happening with our breakfast items. And so I'm going to cut off the bottom white parts here, or those root ends. And most of the flavor from green onions comes from the white of the onion. And then as you get closer up towards the green of it, it's more decorative. There's not a whole lot of flavor there. And so we're going to use these 5 green onions for both the ingredients, but also to garnish with our French toast.
We do have a question in the chat, Kole, asking how far up do you chop green onions when the recipe calls for the white part?
Oh, that's actually a great question, and I'll show you on this camera because I think it's a little bit clearer. So I'll probably stop right about here. Unfortunately, I don't have a whole green onion to like compare it to, but you see how like that branching happens on the green onion. It's usually right underneath that that the white part starts to diminish and it fades into that green. And so just kind of keep an eyeball on it. And I don't know if you can see on here, but I'll show you like the inside of it. You can see it like right about there. It's still pretty darn green in there. And so I probably should have stopped, or if you're just using the white for flavor, that's a good place to kind of rough eyeball it. But I'm not too concerned with this one. What's great about this recipe is it's really forgiving. So whether you want to use, I'm going to mix all of these together so it has some color, some texture, and flavor for everything. That's a great question. But for other recipes, when they call for green onion, I would stop right at that spot. And if you wanted to garnish with the tips, you totally could, but usually that's optional.
Cole, we also have a question asking what you put into saute besides the onion.
So can you say that one more time? Sorry.
She's asking, what did you put into saute besides the onion? Is it garlic?
Oh yes, yep. It's about 3 cloves of minced garlic that I prepped before the class, and then it's also 1 small yellow onion, and they're all at like a fairly small chop, but just kind of eyeball it. I was going for pieces that are right around a 1/4 to a 1/2 inch big. And so for those of you who are just kind of coming into the class, what is happening is we are sauteing those, and we just want to make sure that they're a little bit more translucent because we still are going to add some stuff to it. And let me give this a quick stir. Turn down the heat on this one. And one thing too, onions have a lot of moisture. If you want to help expedite that process, one thing that I like to do is just add in a little bit of salt. And what that does is it creates a gradient to help pull out a lot more moisture than just regularly on the stove. So I'm going to do that right now because I'm ironically just a little bit behind with these guys. Cool. I'm happy with that. So I'm going to set these off to the side. And again, if you want to separate the whites and the greens, that's totally fine. I'm not doing that today because I feel like it's going to be just fine. So as I'm doing this, what we're going to do is move on to the other thing that is going to go into the skillet behind me that has the garlic and the onion, and that is shiitake mushroom. And I wrote this as optional on the recipe. Some people like mushrooms, others don't. It's totally your call. I love mushrooms. I think they're fantastic. They add a really great umami flavor. And to me, the mushroom that gives some of the most fantastic flavor is the shiitake mushroom. It's a lot more robust texture and flavor. It's a little bit more dense than your traditional portobello or even cremini mushrooms. The unique characteristic about them, well, there's a lot of unique characteristics, but one of the things you need to remember when working with shiitake is the stems aren't edible. It won't necessarily hurt you when you eat it, but you wouldn't want to eat like a ton of shiitake stems. And so I'm going to go ahead and remove these real quick. My apartment is smelling like onion right now. Okay. And the same thing, I'm just going to create a nice simple chop. For me, I want these to be a little bit more bite size. So I'm going for a little bit less than a 1/4 of an inch slices. And then I'm just going to go in the opposite direction here. Another fun fact about shiitake mushrooms is that they have this constituent inside them called beta glucan. And I think I spoke about this once before. I forget which class. But beta glucan is essentially this molecule that I believe is a form of saccharide. So it's a sugar chain or a starch chain. And what it does is it helps to cue to your immune system to activate your white blood cells. And so in not so many words, it supports your immune system. And with cold and flu season and the sun being in the position that it is with the earth, we're not getting enough vitamin D. I think it's always a smart idea to consume foods that help support our immune system. So making sure you're eating lots of citrus foods, especially oranges to get that vitamin C. But one thing that you wouldn't suspect is consuming more mushrooms than you would during the summer months. And it's for that immune support. that we're looking for. And shiitake actually has a pretty good ratio of beta glucan per mushroom. And so I'm going to go ahead and put this in here right now. And mushrooms actually have quite a bit of moisture in them as well. Even though they're spongy, they get their sponginess from the moisture that's inside. And so what's essentially going to happen whenever you cook a mushroom is they'll like soak up a chunk of the oil and they'll get sort of soggy at first. And then what will happen is after a certain temperature of heat, they'll release out all of that liquid. And so they're not actually going to release their moisture until that second step in the process. And it's always really fun, at least for me to watch, because you're essentially watching the cell walls break down in real time, which is kind of crazy. To this, I'm also going to add, I have about 3 carrots here that I've grated. And it is totally up to you on what sort of texture you want. This is a finer grate. And if it looks a little bit funky, it's because I used rainbow carrots. And what I like about rainbow carrots is they're beautiful. They come in all these fantastic colors of purple and orange and white and yellow. It's really cool. But also all of those colors are different variations of polyphenols and different flavonoids. So you're getting all of this added nutrition that you wouldn't necessarily normally get with just like the straight up carrot. And I'm always going to be that beta carotene in all of the carrots. But I think it's fun visually as well as nutritionally. And so this is going to go in here too. There's lots of moisture in here, so we're going to try to get this out. I'm going to add a little bit more salt to help aid that moisture. And to this, I'm also going to add 1/4 teaspoon of smoked paprika. Regular paprika is fine, but I really like that robust flavor that smoked paprika has. And then I also have 1/4 teaspoon of cumin. I'm going to do a few little rounds of cracked black pepper. I'll mix this right up.
Cole, we have a question about, they want to know why you chose your skillets, because there's so many to choose from.
This specific one?
I'm going to assume so, unless
Okay.
tells us different.
Ironically, this isn't even the one that I would normally pick. This was a Christmas gift like a few years back from my mom. Let me add a little bit of oil quick because it's a little bit too hot. 1 second. So this is just a non-stick skillet, and there's nothing necessarily fancy about it. But in an ideal world, I am looking for, it's on my wish list of cooking items. I would really love to get a enameled cast iron skillet or different sizes of those. And what I like about that is usually when you work with cast iron that's not enameled, it has a tendency to stick to it, or if you don't quite know what you're doing, it's not as forgiving. And cast iron, just straight up cast iron, is really finicky. It's really moody, and there's lots of ways that it can go south. But when it's enameled, it becomes nonstick. And one of the benefits of using cast iron is that the heat, when you go to cook something, it creates an even texture and cook across the entire thing. And depending on certain metals or nonstick surfaces that you use that come in like all the different variations of skillets or cookware, the heating can be sort of spotty, and that's determined on like, well, 1, the heat source, but also 2, the conductivity of the metal. And historically, cast iron just has like a really great track record. A lot of people have also really strong opinions about using either like strictly copper or stainless steel. And my only thing, I've used them before in the past, but they have a tendency to kind of stick, like it's not necessarily as forgiving when you're going to like fry something like an egg or make a steak, sometimes that debris is kind of difficult to get off. And so I just have a simple non-stick, but in an ideal world, one day, I'm going to have an enameled cast iron skillet. I think that would be really cool. That's a great question. Okay, I'll lower the heat just a little bit. I don't know if you can see all the steam coming off of this thing, but we're looking good. And so what we're gonna do now is start to prep what we're making for our French toast. And so I have here just like a simple little pan. You don't need anything too fancy, just something to dip toast in. And then to this, what I'm going to do is I have 2 eggs I've just scrambled in this bowl here. And I'm gonna go ahead and pour that in. And then to this, I'm also going to mix, set this over here, a half cup of half and half. And you can use milk, you can use whatever sort of dairy that you'd like. But I find that the richness of half and half, or if you use cream, really kind of just elevates the French toast. It's pretty darn tasty. To this as well, we're gonna do another 1/4 teaspoon of cumin as well as smoked paprika. Few cracks of pepper, as well as some salt. Just kind of eyeball it. Mix that up. And I feel like I'm gonna spill it a little bit, so I'm gonna actually bring this over. But the toast or the bread that you wanna use, ideally wouldn't be something like a brioche. That's more of like a sweet and really like super soft texture. What we're going for here is actually a really crusty bread. And so I've spoke about this before, but I really love sourdough. And one of the reasons I like it is the flavor is just fantastic. It's a fermented bread, and the bacteria that's in it that ferments it helps to break down a chunk of the gluten as well as the starch. So whenever I would say, if you're ever making like a grilled cheese, or in this case, a French toast, or a savory French toast, experiment with like a regular piece of either like white bread or a brioche, whatever you normally use, and then try a sourdough and notice how different your body feels. You shouldn't feel as like heavy and like weighted down to when you eat sourdough, and it's because those starches and those sugar chains are much more simple and they're easier on your digestive system. And so on top of it to boot, the flavor is just fantastic. So this slice here, I think I wrote on the ingredients list, or maybe the recipe, I forget which one, that in an ideal world, it would be about like a little bit less than an inch thick piece of bread. This is probably more of a ½ inch, and that's okay. Just whatever you find in the store is fine, but I really love getting fresh loaves. I got this one from Whole Foods, and you can get this giant loaf. I would say we've already eaten half of it in our household here, so like went out to here. A fresh loaf of sourdough, and it's for $4. It's pretty darn cheap. And it lasts about a week or so because there's no preservatives or anything in it. But one thing I found to sort of extend the shelf life of your bread is to actually just keep it in the fridge. And that gives us a few more days if we're not always eating bread, because it's just me and one other person in our household. So I'm gonna go ahead, give us another quick mix. I'm just going to dip it. Move this fork quick, actually. And give it a gentle soak. If your bread is really crusty, you probably want to let it sit in your egg mixture for a few minutes, a minute or two. I probably wouldn't go more than 3 minutes. But this bread is fairly fresh. We got it a few days ago. And so the inside is still fairly porous and spongy. And so what I'm going to do, and actually, you know what, I want to make sure that the oil on this other pan is more evenly distributed, but I'm just going to plop it on the skillet like you normally would a piece of French toast. Awesome, cool. And in an ideal world, you would hear a sizzle right away. So let's see if we can hear it. Did I do my job? There we go. You guys hear it? Okay, I'm gonna rinse off my hands quick. So on top of this, what I'm going to do is just do a few sprinkles of green onion. And as we flip it, that is going to infuse into the bread to give us some color and flavor. I like that. Shift this over here real quick. I'm gonna give this a stir. It's looking fantastic. It smells really good too.
Cole, we have a question. They want to know what type of oil you're using.
So I am using an olive oil, and this one is an extra virgin. And ideally, you wouldn't use that necessarily for frying because that has a low smoke point. But if you missed it, I mixed in a tablespoon or so of butter. And so I find that when you do that in particular, it helps aid in the texture of what you're cooking. So you get this really fantastic crispy texture that you wouldn't necessarily just get with butter. And the flavor is really good too. I like that. You don't have to do it. I would say you could use just straight up butter. I probably would avoid using just only olive oil. You could also use an avocado oil. You could use grapeseed oil, but my defaults usually are anywhere from like coconut oil or avocado oil or butter when it comes to frying something because their smoke point is much higher. That's a good question. Let's see, it's gonna do something. Let this hang out for a little bit. Sometimes you gotta keep an eye on French toast because you don't want it to burn. And you know what? Now that I'm talking about it, I should just check it. We're moving right along. Probably just another minute or so. It moves fast. I'm actually gonna cut the heat on that stuff. What we're going to do next, I think, is just prep this tomato because the French toast is coming along really fast. So this is just a Roma tomato. I've rinsed it off. What I like about Roma tomatoes in particular is they're a lot more fleshy than their counterparts, than like a hothouse tomato or just a regular garden on the vine tomato. There's not as much liquid in them. They're a lot more meaty. And that's what I'm going for today. So I'm just making real small slices, probably around 1/8 of an inch or so. I'm gonna set this little guy off to the side. And we're going to just give this a light mince. So what's happening is we're gonna sprinkle these guys on the top of the French toast so that you get a little piece of tomato in each bite. These are looking good. Cool. So I also have up here in this bowl, I don't know if you can see on that camera, but I've already made some quinoa. And if you're unfamiliar with what quinoa is, it is a kind of grain, and they refer to it as an ancient grain because I believe it's either the Incas or the Aztecs, I forget which one. But in one of those cultures, quinoa was a really prominent part of their diet. And what's curious about it, actually, before I get to that, let me flip this French toast. Oh, that looks great. Okay. But what's curious about quinoa is, I'll show you this way as well. Not only is it a grain, but it's also a complete protein. And it has all 9 amino acids that our body needs to assimilate either like muscle tissue proteins, regular tissue, organs, all of them. And usually when it comes to vegetables or even grains, you usually get either one half of the amino acids or the other. But for some reason, quinoa has all 9. which is fantastic. And so we're going to use this to make these little patties that are really yummy and delicious. So to this bowl of quinoa, I believe this is roughly, I'd say like 2.5, maybe 3 cups of quinoa. I really like quinoa. And so I'm going to eat a lot of this, but I'm going to add into this sunflower seeds, and I'll probably do a tablespoon or 2. I like the crunch of it. And if you don't like sunflower seeds, you could do pumpkin seeds, you could do sesame seeds, or no seeds at all. But I find that the crunch texture is really yummy and fantastic. So I settled on 2 tablespoons of that. I'm going to do a decent helping of this green onion that we chopped just a second ago. And then I'll also, get that off, add the onion, garlic, mushroom, and carrot mixture that we've been working on. There's a lot in here, so give me 1 second. Just don't want to spill it. All right, we are looking good. You can see the steam coming out of it. So we're going to mix this all together. And it's not the worst thing in the world, but ideally you would let this, the onions and the carrot, what we just poured in from the skillet, to cool down a little bit, because to this we're also going to add in 2 eggs. And I'm going to do that here in just a second. I want to get this, for the most part, incorporated. And it seems like I need a bigger bowl, so hang tight with me for just a moment. But as I'm doing that, did a question pop up on there?
Oh,
I wasn't sure. The camera's just too far away from me.
yeah, it was actually for me. So you go ahead and get your bowl.
Okay.
So the question is, looking for the recipe beforehand. So generally before the class, we send the list of ingredients. And then after the class, we send the recipes. So once the class is over, I'll be sending out the full recipes to everyone. So you did not miss anything.
Yes, we just started doing that. We were trying to think of a system, and I'm glad. So yeah, we'll send that right along. Okay. Cool, this will help me. So I'm gonna get going on scrambling these eggs. And you know what, before I do, I wanna check this French toast real quick. Oh my gosh, it's done, perfect. I need a plate. And you know what, we'll plate this up real quick before we get moving. Well, you know what, I'm gonna let that cool down for a moment. Okay, so this is what it would look like. Just like a regular French toast, where it's crusty along the edges. It's heated all the way through, but you want to keep an eye on them because they cook relatively fast. So into this bowl, I'm going to crack 2 eggs, and ideally they would be at room temperature. And the only reason is because it's going to help aid the cooking process, because these cakes cook through pretty darn quick. And I want the temperature to be warm, but I don't want it necessarily to be cold. But the one thing with the carrot and onion mixture is if it's too hot, as we add the eggs, I prefer for them to not scramble immediately. But since I made the quinoa the night before, I'm hopeful that the 2 sort of even out each other temperature-wise. I'm gonna rinse off my hands real quick.
We actually have a couple of questions, Cole. One is, how long is room temperature for the eggs? Or how long do you need to leave the eggs out before they become room temperature?
It's a great question. So I do a few hours. I would say usually 2 to 3 are enough for me. I've seen people do it overnight. And whenever you buy eggs, if they're not from a farmer, I'm just gonna whip these up quick while I'm talking. If they're not from a farmer, they should be pasteurized. And there's a long sort of like standing tradition where a lot of families will actually just keep their eggs completely on the counter. But in recent years, we've done that because we've learned about, foodborne illnesses, and things can go, bad if they're at room temperature. So as a safeguard to that, we usually keep them in the fridge. And so I'm curious to see if any of you guys grew up with having your eggs like on the counter at home. I never had that, but I've heard stories that from my dad, that his mom, they would store eggs not in their fridge, but just straight up on the counter. And they grew up on a farm, and that's what they did. But I would say like more than 4 hours is a little bit much, but 2 to 3 is where I would do it. Was there another question?
Yes. Can these recipes be made vegan?
Yeah, you could do an egg substitute. I forget the brand name. It comes in a powder, but essentially you just take this powder and you mix it with water, and it creates the same texture as, or the same, what is that called? It does the same thing as egg. So what egg is doing in this recipe is it's binding all this fluffy quinoa together, and making it into a cake form. So this egg substitute, I'm sorry, I don't know the name off the top of my head, but it's a powder, and you could probably find it at like a Whole Foods, or I think I've even seen it at Safeway. It's pretty prevalent right now. You could do that, and then instead of milk, I would do probably like an oat milk creamer, or just like an oat milk. The problem with like regular everyday milk alternatives or nut milks is they're more watery than milk usually is. And so I usually opt for something a little bit creamier. And that would be where I would go with like this savory French toast route. In the quinoa cakes, I don't believe, I guess the egg is the only thing in there that is non-vegan. And then instead of cheese, you don't have to put cheese on top. I love goat cheese. And so that's gonna go on top of this French toast here in just a minute. But hopefully that answers that question. Was there another one?
Yes. How much dry quinoa makes 2.5 cups?
That's a really good question. I had to kind of look that up the other day. I believe it is a 3/4 cup would be about 2.5 cups. The ratio is something like, well, you know what? It probably is. That's tough. I would say just do a cup of quinoa, a cup of dry quinoa, and you're probably good. And that'll get you around there, because this doesn't need to be perfect. Like the cakes are really forgiving. So I don't want you to worry too much about it. So this is going to make probably 8 cakes. And if that's too much for your household, if you know you're not going to eat them all, then you could split it in half. So it'd be a 1/4 or 1 egg and a 1/2 cup of dry quinoa. And I believe the ratio of quinoa is, if you do a cup of quinoa, it's essentially 2 cups liquid. So it's usually double, but I always like to add a little bit less, because I find that the texture is a lot better than if you do exactly double the amount of the dry quinoa that you're using. It's a finicky little thing, but once you get it, it's not too bad.
So we've got a couple comments in there. One saying that in Europe they don't refrigerate eggs, and another one saying Schlegel Farms comes to Delray Farmers Market and sells eggs for $5 a dozen that can rest on the counter for 2 weeks. So
wow. Okay. Cool. I've always wondered, because I've been considering doing that. The more, like with my produce, I've been trying to keep things on the counter a lot more with citrus and with tomatoes, especially. I grew up where we stored tomatoes in the fridge. But the hard part about that is the texture is always a little bit off. And tomatoes are really great at room temperature, so I don't do that anymore. I kind of want to try it with eggs, but I get so gosh darn scared. But that's good to know.
we do have another question asking, part 1, how long do you cook the toast on each side? And part 2, how long can butter and eggs stay at room temperature without making you sick?
I don't know the exact answer for that last question. With that one farms, they say 2 weeks. I don't want to like exactly quote that, but um, can I get back to you on that? I know for butter, because I keep butter out at room temperature, and we move through it pretty darn quick. And I've had butter out on the counter for about a week, and I've like been fine. I think people sometimes leave it out for longer, but for legal reasons, I'd like to not quote you something exactly, and I would refer you to the CDC. um, but what was the first question?
Oh yeah, how long do you cook the toast on each side?
Yeah, and I would say in between 3 and 4 minutes. Mine's at a medium heat. You just kind of want to eyeball it because each person's stove is a little bit different. And just like we talked about with the different kinds of skillets, depending on what skillet you're using, it's gonna essentially reflect on how you would cook that thing. So I would say around 4 minutes, but keep an eye on it because sometimes it goes quick.
Do you rinse the quinoa before cooking?
I like to. Sometimes there's like just a little bit of powdery residue. You don't have to, but the thing is, and I'll see if I can find it quick. Um, it's always nice to have like a mesh strainer because the quinoa is so small. It's like about the same size as a sesame seed, maybe smaller. If you use like a regular colander when you go to strain it, it's just gonna escape and go everywhere. And so this is just nice to have on hand. You don't have to. I think it's fine if you don't, but it's just something good housekeeping wise to make sure that everything's nice and solid. I know with rice, you absolutely always want to rinse it because the starch, gosh, it's just gonna have to be a whole other class. Maybe we'll have a rice class. There's lots of reasons why you want to rinse your rice, but anyway, it's a good thing just to do always. So I need to get moving a little bit, but I'm going to make, I'll just start with one patty so I can show you guys. But what we're gonna do is I'm just gonna cup this in my hand, and I'm gonna do probably a little bit less than a half cup of this quinoa mixture. And what we're looking for, I might even do just a little bit more. Patty size wise is we're looking for something that's right around 3 inches wide and maybe 3/4 inch thick. And so what I like to do first is actually just kind of make this little ball. It's more puffy, it's more thick than normal. And then what's gonna happen is as I set it on the skillet, it's gonna create this crust on the bottom. And when I go to flip it, then I'll flatten it. And that will give me the thickness that I'm looking for, and will also heat it through nice and evenly. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that now.
Cole, we have a question. Just to verify, the green tops of the green onion was only for garnish, and you just use the whites in the saute.
1 second.
Okay.
So historically, yes, the green tops of the green onion are usually for garnish. There is some flavor there, and of course, like it's not bad to eat because you eat the top. Like if it is for garnish, you eat the garnish, right? So it's not necessarily bad to eat, but it's not always the most flavorful part. So the flavor portion of the green onion comes from that bottom fourth, maybe less, that bottom eighth. And it's the white that has that really allium, that onion flavor. And so for me, I just mixed them all together. If you wanted to be more precise and you wanted to have, or more accurate with your flavors, and have like a really onion forward, either quinoa patty or French toast, you could do just the whites. But for me, what I like about mixing in the green with this in particular is it adds color. And the color is always a part of how, or a variable on like the sensation of when you go to consume something. And that's also the same reason I used rainbow carrots, was for color. And there's different things balancing out. So it's okay if you mix in the green, but when a recipe usually calls for green onion, generally they're referring to the white of it and not necessarily the green part. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes, I think so.
Okay, cool. So I'm just gonna flatten this down a little bit. I'm still at a medium heat. So there's lots of ways to top this or to garnish this piece of French toast, savory French toast. And so I love goat cheese. You don't have to use goat cheese, but it's this soft, really sort of savory texture. And so I'm going to do a few little dollops of this. This looks really good. Cool. Start there. And then also what I'm going to do, I'm a big fan of capers. And so I will do just a sprinkle of these guys on top. So there's lots of salt happening. I think I've mentioned it in a few classes. I'm a big fan of salt. I don't know what it is. Don't have a sweet tooth, but my goodness, do I love salt. And then garnish with a little bit of green onion. And voila, that's it. I tip it, but everything's gonna fall off. Hopefully you can see on this camera. All right. And that is the savory French toast. It's pretty straightforward, and you don't have to get too crazy with the way that you garnish it, but you can if you want to. You could probably do parsley on there if you wanted. You could do an heirloom tomato when those are in season. You can get some fantastic color and variety, but just keep in mind, they're usually a bit more watery and not as fleshy. Oh gosh, the tomato. The tomato goes on here. Yeah, forgot that. Well, gosh, look at that. That's so fun. Perfect. I'm going to go flip this quinoa patty that runs off my hands real quick, covered in goat cheese. And you know what, before I do this, I want to show you guys the quinoa. You can still see probably from that camera, it's a really fluffy texture. And because there's not a whole lot of egg in like this giant mixture, the binding together isn't a perfect science. And so I find when you go to flip the quinoa patty, it has a tendency sometimes, if you're not like too quick with it, that it likes to fall apart. And so you want to get under quick rather than sort of like meticulous about it, and then flip it low and fast. Because if you like bring it up and then flip it as it goes to like descend and hit the pan, sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes has a tendency to like burst. So you want to be sort of smart about it. And so I'm going to shift this over here so you can see, hopefully I do it right. You can see a little bit on how I tackle this. So hold this. Oops. Oh, shoot. And of course, the top of the skillet kind of hit my finger, and so I nicked it. So mine's falling apart a little bit. Darn it. I'm gonna try one more time, and maybe I can get it to work. And just like a small one real quick. But anyway, the texture you're looking for is it's gonna get crispy on top and help to hold it together. And then the flip is what ideally does it. So while those are frying, I do want to ask you guys, because I think the next class is, gosh, what date is that? Is it February, is it 3rd?
Let me check real quick. Let's see. For some reason I have the 6th in my head, but
Okay,
I could be wrong.
well, regardless, whatever that date is, I was gonna try to do more of a Valentine's Day theme, because the next one after that I think is like after Valentine's Day. And so would you guys be interested in more of like a desserts, like decadence, chocolate, kind of a themed class? Or would you rather have more of like a meal? If you type it in.
So yes, please, if you have thoughts on it, put it in the chat or the Q&A. And I just checked, Cole, the 6th is the next date.
Gotcha. Okay, cool.
Okay, so the first comment, either or.
Well, we'll see how I'm feeling then, because we can go both ways. I want to do, oh, they're gosh, there's so much I want to do. I'm like considering doing different kinds of chocolate covered strawberries and fruit, and also like sugar coated like candied fruit. I think could be fun. But right now I don't know what it is. But like I'm craving pesto all the time. And so I want to do potentially a pesto themed class on how to incorporate it into a bunch of different things. So we'll see how that goes.
So far we've gotten, let's see, 2 votes for Valentine meal, 2 votes for dessert. Also, we have a comment saying that the rice class would be excellent as well with different kinds of nutritious rices.
Oh,
So-
yeah. Cool. I need to make a mental note of this. Okay. Well, I'm going to try.
Maybe if we do a Valentine meal, then we should just do a general dessert class later.
Yeah. And maybe I'll do like a half and half one where I'll do a dessert and a meal with the Valentine's class. Maybe I can do a little bit of both.
The most recent comment is combo. So
Okay, cool. I'll probably do that then. Unfortunately, like these aren't going as well as I'd like. And you know what? That happens with a live class. You just kind of got to go with it. What I think happened is I have way too much quinoa per egg. I would probably have to add in 1 more egg, and I'll do it after we wrap this up. But I'm going to attempt to get this on a plate so I can show you what this would look like, or what I have going on with me right now. Now, it's just not holding together. And that's okay, it happens. It's still fantastic though, it tastes delicious. But you can see that from this camera, it's fallen apart, there's not enough egg, but we're looking for this crust on top. And in an ideal world, that crust would be a lot more pronounced because there would be another egg into it. And it would kind of bind together a bit more. But such is life, c'est la vie, it happens, but it's still delicious, and I'm still gonna have a bite regardless.
we have a question. I've seen quinoa in different colors. Is there a reason to use one color or the other, or do they all taste the same?
To me, they taste the same, but there are different colors. I believe there's a white, a red, and more of like a deep brown one. And I believe that there's some nutrients in the darker colors, the red and the brown. It's probably just the kind of flavonoid that's in it. But in terms of like the overall nutrition with the complete proteins we're talking about, and these quinoa is packed with fiber. Like there's no issue of regularity if you're eating quinoa. And it tastes so good. Like it really doesn't have a flavor at all. Like it's slightly nutty, almost like a sesame flavor. But you can add anything to it. You could do, you could add a vinaigrette, like ranch. You could use it in something like this. It doesn't really have much of a flavor, but the texture is really light and fluffy. But the colors, there's probably a little bit more flavonoids in the red and brown, but I always just go for the tricolor, the combo of all 3. That way I'm getting a healthy mix of everything.
We have another suggestion in the box, maybe a Valentine meal, and then in parentheses, chicken piccata pasta, and then the dessert, and maybe only do video for one or the other. But I feel like we can figure out some kind of combo in there.
Yeah, I know. I'm thinking of all these ideas now, and I could probably even do pesto with like a dessert thing, or there's so many directions. Like I don't know whether to go like the classic, like do I do something with oysters or mussels because that's supposed to be like an aphrodisiac, right? There's all sorts of directions. I'll look into it. I love these suggestions because pasta also, like Italian food, that's so romantic as well. I'll get thinking. Right now, I'm settling on a dessert and like a meal combo, like a hybrid. That seems fun.
That sounds good to me.
Yeah. Are there any more questions?
Not yet.
Okay.
So if anyone has any questions, please stick them in there. We can pass them on to Kole.
Well, this was our 2 items today. We have our savory French toast and unfortunately a little bit more of a sloppy version of quinoa cakes. I think I got a little bit too carried away with how much quinoa that I made. and that's all right. But both are really yummy. The texture is nice, even though this doesn't look as like beautiful. It's not plated perfectly. The flavor and the texture is really fun to play with. So I hope you guys like it, and I will see you for sure on February 6th with some sort of Valentine's Day decadence that you can share with your loved ones.
We've had a few questions pop up. Is there any garnish for the quinoa?
I suppose you could maybe do like a little, much of the same. You can do with some tomato if you want. You could do maybe the green onion or a cheese. I don't personally do anything. It's like really good as is. What's great about this is the crispiness on the outside, and the if you use some sort of seed like a sunflower seed or a pumpkin seed, there's that crunch. But the inside is so warm and fluffy and moist that I really don't think it needs much else. Like you could do like a drizzle of some sort of sauce on it. But I've tried that before and it just doesn't really need it because there's a lot of flavor in there. The carrot and the onions and the garlic really have this fantastic marriage, so I'm fine with it. Although if you wanted to do something, you totally could.
We have off the subject, I have some chia seeds in a bag for several months. It's still healthy to use.
Yep, absolutely. Chia seeds, if they're like in an airtight or a Ziploc, something like that, they're pretty darn forgiving. I've had chia seeds for a long time, and usually they're pretty darn good. The only thing is you just don't want them to be exposed to humidity or moisture because they're like a really porous seed. And so making sure it's in some sort of like Ziploc or like airtight container in a dark space, you're probably good. So I bet they're still good.
We have one suggestion for chocolate pie for Valentine's Day.
Oh, okay.
And then one comment, either way, whatever is picked will be delish and way fancier than this novice cook could do on her own.
Well, I mean, it's clear from today, we're all just trying to get by, you know, and this is my own recipe. So we all have our days. Unfortunately, today was mine.
All right, great. Well, that is all the questions that we have today. I would like to just do my normal little spiel that Cooking for Kole is supported and sponsored by the Beatley Friends of the Library. So if you're interested in more programs like this, please visit beatleyfriends.org. The library is closed to the public currently, but we are doing curbside service. So if you want to place books on hold, you can set curbside appointments to pick them up. You can also visit alexlibraryva.org/virtual for more information about our virtual programs, our virtual resources, ebooks, e-audiobooks, digital magazines, digital music, etc., online classes. We have it all. And yes, so again, our next meeting will be Saturday, February 6th at 12 p.m. So if you're registered for this class, I believe you should also be registered for that one. And I think you'll get a reminder. The recipes will go out for this as soon as we end this class. I'll go ahead and put those in there, and you'll get an email with the recipes for this course. And oh yes, and this will be posted to our YouTube channel sometime in the next week or so. And I see in the comments here we have several thank yous for another great cuisine adventure. And also a question, I've heard cumin is used primarily for meat. Is it okay for chicken?
Oh, I think so. Yeah. In lots of Indian food dishes, I think there's a decent amount of cumin. I think you could. Yeah. It's just the one thing is cumin's a really loud flavor. So less is always more. If you find that you want more of like a cumin flavor profile, you can always add more, but you can't take it out. So stay on the lower side of the spices and then kind of go up from there.
Okay. Oh, and I think we have one more question. Let me fix that. Oh yes, just a thank you. Thank you, Beatley and Kole. So you're welcome.
Thanks, guys.
All right, everyone. Well, we will see you hopefully next week. Bye.